preservation. I told him I'd be happy to. And so this morning I put together a presentation which I'd like to share with you this evening. So here we go. Some folks here have been longtime denizens of the Mesilla Valley, and my slides don't want to advance. Why is that? There we go. The valley that we call home has long been overshadowed in many ways for its proximity to El Paso, which has been a commercial hub, and its distance from Tucson and Albuquerque, which are other areas, other communities that developed along similar lines. And yet, Las Cruces, nestled here between the river and the Oregon Mountains, has somehow or another been has not been swept up in the acts of modernity to the extent that other communities in the region have. Nonetheless, when 3 years ago, when I accepted this position, there was a message that one of my staff colleagues shared with me. Don't know who the person who wrote it was, but they really took a tire iron to the side of the head of the city of Las Cruces, and specifically about a historic preservation position, because in that person's point of view, there was not a single building anywhere in Las Cruces that was of value, worth preserving, worth investing in. It was a throwaway city. And so it just gave me the impetus to prove them wrong.
They're saying they can't see the slides, so I'm just gonna make sure that they.
Okay. All right. Seem to have a little bit. Is that good, Jerry? Okay, bueno. All right, so we basically have a two-part presentation. I want to walk through a number of slides this evening. In the first few slides, we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to look at the reason for preservation. Why do we do this sort of work? Why is it important? What value does it have? The second part is going to be a case study. In particular, I will be pointing out, as Garland mentioned, some of the imminent issues that pertain to the former Las Cruces Country Club building. So we begin with the purpose of preservation. I may be preaching to the choir, and if so, that's perfectly fine. But we know that buildings are expensive investments, first of all. How they are built, the amount of materials in them, their longevity, upkeep, maintenance, their functions, everything is expensive. We're at a crossroads in our human impact on Mother Earth in many ways, and we are experiencing it in many different capacities, with climate, with temperature, with weather events, and with the built environment. And in large part, one of the problems is that we create a whole lot of refuse and trash, and a full 30% is estimated in the landfills just in the United States alone. 30% is building material. This little home that we see in the picture right here that Henry Trost designed in 1907, the H.B. Holt House, you're all familiar with it. It's there at Alameda and Picacho on the southwest corner of that intersection. This is not a very large home. If this building were demolished, it would put a lot of material into a landfill. And where does everybody want a landfill? Anywhere but in my backyard. We need it further away from where we are. This is a small building. I used to work in the El Paso City Hall. It's on the footprint of where the ballpark is in downtown. That was a 10-story building with a basement. That was a lot of material when it came down. And it had to go away, and it had to go into a landfill in El Paso County, the entirety of that building. So retaining our buildings and keeping them in productive use. I quote from the chief building official of the city of Las Cruces, who is also the director of the community development department, Mr. Larry Nichols. And he told me the other day, said, Troy, a vacant building does no one any good. And I think we're all very aware of that. Vacant buildings are attractive nuisances. Vacant buildings are broken into. Vacant buildings become fire hazards. The roadway in down here at Avenida de Macia and Hickory, it's been fenced off. That building 2 weeks ago on 3 consecutive nights, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, fire department responded each night to put out fires at that building. It has not been occupied in a long time, and it is being broken into. Vacant buildings are no good. What we were trying to do for preservation, for the longest time, there has been a mentality and a perception, a public perception about preservation, that buildings are really just enormous museum artifacts. They just happen to be out. They're not under an acrylic or glass case with a nice light on them with a little plaque or a little bit of information card, but they're really big ornamental pieces that we can look at and enjoy. That mentality is not viable economically or feasibly in any manner. So preservation is really an economic activity, productive use. I will use that phrase frequently, productive use, because we were talking about the economics of the uses of buildings. So fostering and supporting local business in buildings, skilled labor for their restoration, that is job creation. We are right in the middle of an election season. Job creation is something very important that candidates like to speak about. Restoration of buildings, restoring buildings for adaptive reuse, for new businesses is an economic engine. By preventing needless loss, by taking down irreplaceable buildings, by striving for a sustainable built environment, and protecting and using cultural properties. And that's very important, not just saving a building for the sake of doing it, but actually putting it back into productive use. In the last 3 years, and certainly this is in no way to suggest that nothing happened in Las Cruces prior to 2019, but in 2019, a bit of momentum was gained. For the first time in the city of Las Cruces, the municipal government, that is, a position was created and filled, dedicated specifically for historic preservation. A lot of people applied. From what I understand, I was fortunate to receive the offer. So I began, ironically, on April 15, 2019, not just tax day in our country, but it happened on that very day. The entire news cycle around the globe was consumed by the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral on the Ile-de-France in Paris. I don't know if that's a bad omen or not, but it just so happens that my day that I reported to work, there was the tragic fire in Paris. Let's not conflate those. What do you say? We'll keep that separate. Within a short period of time, the work that had been ongoing since 2015 actually since 2012, I beg your pardon, for ad hoc committee working on the drafting, the writing of a historic preservation ordinance. Some of the people who were involved in that process are in this room tonight. And one of the things that's important is that whole process, it gained momentum. It indicated a grassroots interest in preservation, which in large part, I think, was the impetus for a staff position. In December of 2019, just prior to changes in membership on the city council, that ordinance was brought to council. The votes were there. It was voted and approved. So that was a milestone. 3 months later, you have 7 people who are selected and appointed by mayor and the members of city council to serve on the first iteration of the Historic Preservation Commission. Dr. John Bloom is seated back here. He was one of our very first, he was one of the first 7 commissioners in our city. He's seated right there, ladies and gentlemen. And so you create a commission, you create the staff position, you adopt the ordinance, you amend your municipal code, pardon me, and then the most other notable achievement, a long-held objective locally, was certified local government status for the city of Las Cruces. That was achieved in December of 2021. Las Cruces is CLG number 10 statewide. All right. A certified local government means that we have an official partnership with the state of New Mexico and through the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, back to Washington, D.C., Department of Interior. What it means is availability of technical training, of staff support, and of grants that are not available to every municipality and county elsewhere in New Mexico that is not a certified local government. This is really a big deal. And one of the things that made it happen is a lot of local support for a long time, and it came to fruition. And you really need 3 components in order to achieve it: a full-time dedicated staff position, a commission that oversees certificate of appropriateness work, review for design guidelines, and you need to have an ordinance to oversee it all. All 3 have been achieved. We now have a certified local government status. These are monumental tasks. It provides us the foundation to work from. In the Las Cruces Municipal Code, chapter number 40 is historic preservation. Again, there's been a longstanding perception that preservation is the work of busybodies who are just trying to stop progress and all that kind of stuff. What is often neglected and not brought up is that preservation is an economic development activity. It is an activity that has a cultural dimension. It is an activity that has a societal benefit, an environmental protection benefit, and of course, sustainable architecture. All right, so what does the commission do? What does this ordinance do? In essence, any new construction, alteration, or demolition all must be approved, reviewed before any of these acts can occur. The vehicle to do that is a document called a certificate of appropriateness, where a scope of work is presented and reviewed either administratively, that's by staff, or by the Historic Preservation Commission itself. Upon that review, the next step is about inspecting that work is conforming to building and zoning code. Despite popular perception, Chapter 40 is a city-wide ordinance. It is a local law. It does not just pertain to segments of town. It pertains to everything, every building located within the corporate limits of Las Cruces, New Mexico. Now, the objective is buildings that are 50 years of age or older. So the buildings that are 10, that were only built in 2011, 40 years from now, this ordinance will apply to them. In the meantime, Mesquite, original townsite neighborhood, Mesilla Park, city-owned properties that are at least 50 years of age, think Rio Grande, the theater, think Women's Improvement Association building, think the Thomas Brannigan Memorial Library, Cultural Center, and of course the Alameda Depot neighborhood, the train depot. All of these buildings fall under this particular ordinance, but it is a citywide ordinance for any building at least 50 years of age. It is an enforceable local law. An ordinance is very different from a resolution adopted by city council. The resolution is solidarity and support for a course of action. An ordinance is a law. We are trying to account for our building stock, the older building stock, in our land use planning, so that the first option is not always knock it down, scrape the site, and start brand new. That's the purpose. You have to have an end game about the potential. There are people, and I am one of them, who respond to the intrinsic value of history. You can't put a dollar figure on it, but it's something I respond to, because the building that we saw a moment ago, the Holt residence, I dare you to find someone who can design something that original right now and build it. It would be difficult because of many reasons. We don't teach architecture, we teach drafting, but I digress. I'll stay away from that for a moment. All right. In order to be effective with preservation, you really need to demonstrate what most other, what just about everybody will say is the bottom line, and that's money. That's where a lot of people really think that decision making should have a big portion of influence. So while I respond to intrinsic value, others want to see an increase in the property tax value, especially the administrators of a municipality. Going back to vacant buildings, it is underutilized and it is a drain on the city's property tax roll. A building that is in productive use with rent, with occupancy, with sales tax, gross sales tax receipts is a economic boost rather than burden to the city's economy. So putting buildings back into revenue generating use is very, very important. On a intrinsic level, maintaining a distinctive sense of place. The Art Museum in downtown Dallas, Texas, about a decade ago, had a photographic exhibit called Anytown, USA. Wonderful photographs that spread out over several galleries. And not one place had an identification label on it. But these were photos on the important thoroughfares in these towns all across the country. And they all had similar features. They all had the McDonald's, they all had the fast food restaurants, they all had the same building types, they all had the same types of cars. There was not, and it was intentionally done, of course, there was nothing distinctive that you would know, this is Lincoln, Nebraska. I know it's Lincoln, Nebraska. There's nothing there. It could be Dallas, it could be Des Moines, Anytown, USA. So when we were working up in Los Lunas, 200 miles to the north, I had an argument one time with an individual because they said Los Lunas needs to be more like Santa Fe. We need to promote Los Lunas as if it were Santa Fe. And I said, there's only a big problem there with your logic. We are Los Lunas and they are Santa Fe. And they have the buildings and the destination and the restaurants and all the accoutrements because they have a distinctive place. What do they call themselves? The City Different. Have for a century now, and it's worked very well for them. You can't create it. What is Las Cruces? It is Las Cruces. Promote what you have, take care of what you have. You have a distinctive sense of place. The Oregon Mountains, when the miracle of the flow of water returns and our dirt trail to the west is filled again, that will be a distinctive feature in our built environment. Many of you know Irene Oliver Lewis, who is very, very supportive of the creative economy. Putting buildings back into productive use helps foster both traditional economic activity and creative activity. the arts, the very things that feed our souls and not necessarily our checkbooks. It's not just economic driven, but it's the stuff that we're made of. We promote our town, this place, as a heritage tourism destination. I constantly hear the complaint when people come to visit here, what is there to do? Let me take you to Mesilla. Let's go to Mesilla because they have the real stuff, the real McCoy. It's authentic over there. In this last point, we've all heard the battle cry, save the courthouse. You can substitute, save the church, save the old high school, whatever you want. Okay, that is our earlier model of preservation. Why don't we look at it in this manner? Do something with the courthouse. You have to have a purpose. If we are going to restore buildings, they have to be meaningful. It can't be just an esoteric exercise. We do it because we can do it. We have to do it for a purpose. What are our threats? The first one that came to mind is the one I didn't even bother listing because everybody's very familiar with it. And that is natural disaster, fire and flood, tornadoes in particular. These threats are not limited to buildings that are 50 years of age or older. That is a constant threat for our built environment and our natural landscapes as well. All of these things are, that just first comes to mind. However, we can drive on many of our streets here in Cruces and we can see many buildings that are underutilized. By that, what I am referring to is if there's office space that is not being used. If the building itself is partially closed off, does not have full occupancy, it's underutilized both in a retail, for example, in a commercial sense, and also for a tax in the purpose of taxation. But you will have representation, maybe not from Parliament, but we'll see. Vacancy. Vacant buildings do no one any good. What do they do? They invite decline. An uninhabited building does begin to fritter away. No matter how well built it is, if it is not occupied, if it is not maintained, it literally, the elements begin to whittle away at it little by little by little. The nomenclature in my line of work, that process is called demolition by neglect. What man will not do by knocking it down with heavy machinery, Mother Nature will with time and weather. It's a long, slow process, but that's demolition by neglect. One of the greatest threats to buildings, and we hear this all the time, is people sometimes just really lack vision, imagination. They don't know better. I think if I heard the expression correctly, poor people and poor results, poor solutions, we don't know how to take care of buildings. And so if you don't have a sense of purpose of what to do with the building, we often hear, I'm just going to tear it down because I don't know what to do with it. That is a very tragic approach, and it's very wasteful because, again, all that material has to be scooped up, put on a truck, and hauled elsewhere. And you don't want it in your backyard. Buildings are perceived to be expendable and have no value, whether the value is in dollars and cents or in cultural value, a sense of irreplaceability. There are misinterpretations of the significance of what is called a community landmark. And what are such buildings? Their place in a town. In a moment, I am going to really be honing down on a community landmark. For those who grew up here or have lived here for several decades. The country club is one of those types of buildings, a community landmark. There is underachieved potential for the economic use and value. That's another way of saying underutilized. You're not getting the full value out of a building. And of course, aside from natural disaster, the automobile and everything attendant to it is the #1 killer of all buildings. Interstate highways, we love them, we need them. Wide roads, we love them, we need them. Bigger intersections, yes, think of the safety. Traffic engineers have killed more buildings than you can shake a stick at. Bottom line is what it all boils down to. We prioritize the roadway because we like to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. And hell have no fury like an old building right in the way of modernity. It's coming down. When they built, if you're familiar with Philadelphia, up near the river, when they built the interstate highway system through there in the 1950s, the route that was selected was residential, and every home there, with the exception of maybe 5% out of the many hundreds of houses that were brought down, were from the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th centuries. The young houses there were built in the 20th century, and half of that century had already occurred, and there were only about 5% of the buildings in the entirety of that area. Irreplaceable. Knocked it all down. Same thing happened in El Paso, cut it right through town, and on and on. Okay, so we love our cars, but our cars tend to kill a lot of things. In the ordinance, the definition of cultural property. 2 days ago, several of us were on a Zoom phone call. There were 2 of us here in Cruces and 4 in Santa Fe, the state office. And one of the arguments that came up about the country club building, and this has come up a number of times, is the building is not registered on local registry or the state register or the national register. Therefore, it has no value. That is not a historic building. It requires a plaque on the front in order for it to be historic. I respectfully disagree. And so does the law of Las Cruces, New Mexico. This definition of cultural property in chapter 40, throughout that chapter, we define this work as protection for cultural properties or historic district properties. The word "or" is a lawyer's good ally. It's wonderful. So we will see "or" here several times. What is a cultural property? Well, it's any building or structure, object, improvement, or site that has particular historic or aesthetic significance to the city, the state, or the nation, where cultural, political, spiritual, economic, educational, archaeological, social, or artistic history of the community, state, or nation is reflected or exemplified. That is a very broad definition. Okay, but wait, there's more. Okay, so the second component, or a property which is identified with historic personages or important events that are local, state, or national. Okay, that's the little man theory of history and the great man theory of history, right? We all do not have Mount Vernon here where George and Martha made their home. But we do have the attorney, H.B. Holt, and his family. That's pretty cool. Okay. H.B. Holt did not make waves on a national level, but he did locally. The third way, a cultural property embodies the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural specimen that is inherently valuable for representation of a period, a style, or a method of construction. I will make that argument very boldly in a moment. Fourth, it is a notable work of construction. If you're familiar with the Mills building in downtown El Paso at the San Jacinto Plaza. There are several markers on it: a state historical marker, National Historic Registry marker, and a Texas State Engineer marker. That building is listed in multiple ways, not just because it's architectural aesthetic, but because of the engineering behind its construction. It is an engineering masterpiece. So it would fit with number 4 criteria here. And lastly, a cultural property is a notable work of a master designer or architect whose individual genius influenced a particular period of time or an aesthetic movement. I would argue Henry Charles Trost of Toledo, Ohio meets the bill on that one. So let's look, in the few minutes we have remaining, mostly photographs from this point forward, a case study. You're all familiar with the Country Club building over here at North Main Street, designed by Trost and Trost architects and engineers out of El Paso, Texas in 1929. It has been vacant for a decade. That building is structurally sound. There are additions that were added in the 1960s on the east side that extended far toward the east. All of those were removed. They were demolished in June of 2020. That was a project that I was involved in very closely, supervising to make sure that it's just the additions, not the good stuff. Leave the original part alone. This building, as we saw a moment ago, it does conform to the definition of a cultural property, although, again, not listed on a register. It lends itself to a wide variety of productive, adaptive reuses, and this building, in my assessment, is a community landmark. This building meets that definition. Community landmark. A Reed's photograph from circa 1940. This is what happens when you build a beautiful building, and upon its completion, even the El Paso Times, a writer for the Times in October of 1929, which we all know is a consequential month for the United States and the global economy, as we're all familiar. We all know the stories. Took the time to say the Mesilla Valley is blessed and graced with a beautiful new building in Las Cruces, the Country Club building. So a nice compliment from our neighbor 40 miles away. Not too shabby. 2 views of this building when she was grand and well taken care of, only about 11 years old when these photographs were taken. Now, it may be a little, I don't know how clearly you can see on the drawing. I'm going to step away. I want to point out something, so the people on Zoom are just going to have to, unfortunately, bear with me. One thing I want you to note on this sheet, of course, we have Trost and Trost Architects, March 1929 is written here. We have the front elevation, which of course it faces to the south. The rear elevation this building has had its back turned to what became Main Street for its entire existence. Very few people have seen the front of the building unless they went there to play golf or went to an event, because over the last decade, very few people have seen the building from the front. But the one thing I want you to know, on the rear elevation, you have a double row of windows, correct? You have upper and lower. That's very significant to pay attention to, because you will see a magic trick here in a moment. All right. Since 2011, when the Country Club ceased operation and the building was shuttered, there have been efforts. Now, I wrote to retain the building, but I'm actually speaking with a forked tongue. There has been more effort to remove rather than retain the building. We're on our 4th generation of developers that have had an eye on developing the overall land right there, the former golf club area. And so each generation of development has confronted the same question: what is to be done with the country club building? And regrettably, there has not been a fully developed concept that becomes an idea that has been discussed from different perspectives and different point of view, primarily from the economic perspective and from the preservation perspective. That sort of dialogue has been lacking. And that's where we really need to begin in order to accomplish something, because this is, I hate the expression, it was a win-win situation. I hate that expression because it's so trite and overused, but that's really what we're looking for here, okay? So preservation, you really have to focus on the big picture as well, and economics is part of the big picture. So over the last decade, it's been a sputtering approach, unfortunately. And so in June of 2020, not the current property owners, but the previous ones, the city of Las Cruces agreed and supervised the removal of the additions. And there was no kicking up of dirt, no public outcry for the additions. But the original block, there was initially a bit of teeth gnashing and anxiety, because the word in circulation was the entire building is coming down. And that was not the case 2 years ago. And although there is an imminent threat to it, the temperature on that threat has been turned down a bit. And I'll get to that momentarily, because there are some details that are significant to provide everyone with as the British aviators in the Second War said, the true gin, the true intelligence, the true gin. So the current property owners, unless they had an epiphanic moment last night, prior to me preparing this presentation this morning, they do not envision retaining the building in their development plans. Okay, this is not a fait accompli. This is not a done deal. We still have miles to go before anything is done. We are at the very beginning here. Support for this building, not only, as you see at the bottom, toward the bottom of the list, among people who live here in Las Cruces, El Paso, and other places. 6 days ago, over at the Zool Library, there was a really remarkable event that occurred with regard to a presentation about the Amador Family Correspondence Project. That project is to digitize through a generous grant from the National Endowment of Humanities, digitizing many thousand pages of family correspondence for preservation purposes and for research. Members of the Amador family were present. I was informed afterwards that one of the members of the commission, seated right here, Commissioner Ed Hayworth, is seated right down here in the ball cap, wrote me an email and said that he had spoken to several of the family members, and they live in California, I think northern New Mexico, and Arizona. They're not physically here, but their roots are. And all of them, and when he was telling them the plight of the country club building, they spoke up, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? Their name carries, I would say, gravitas and weight. After all, the hotel that their family's legacy is predicated upon is a building that is under reconstruction. How about restoration? Okay, so people care about this building. The Henry Trost Society, based out of Phoenix, Arizona, cares about this building, and its members are spread out across the United States and Mexico. The Historic Preservation Division in Santa Fe, Mesilla Valley Preservation here on the west side, the City of Las Cruces Historic Preservation Commission the Doña Ana Arts Council, who wrote a letter on behalf several months ago to the mayor, to the city manager, and to all members of city council in defense of that building. And of course, the Doña Ana County Historical Society. This is an incomplete list, but it's all the real estate I had in order to type it up. It's incomplete. This building means something to people. Mr. Dennis Daly and Jim Eccles were gracious enough to help me out. Scanned a couple of pictures, and I wanted to include these two. From 1998, that would be the photograph on the over here on the left, and from 2007, the opposite photograph. The purpose is place. We have the Las Cruces Country Club Women's Golf Association, an organization that means something to women who played golf, and this was their course that they played on. The building is a backdrop, but it is the place that is the defining element for the community. Their community is that of golfers, and at a specific place in one hell of a beautiful building to wrap up 9 rounds, 9 holes of golf. Seven years after the latter of the two pictures was taken, on November the 5th of 2014, a handful of us were on site for a tour of the building. The interior of it was in good shape. The exterior was in good shape, no graffiti, no damage, although it hadn't, at that point, it had been closed up for 3 years. Just in a month or so before demolition began in June of 2020, a group of us were on site, and including Director Larry Nichols, who is an architect by trade. He's my boss there at City Hall. And we were there on site. We toured the building. Everyone is looking at the elements of the interior and the exterior. I'm observing Larry while he's looking at the building, because I look at it again through the eyes of a preservationist. He is looking at it as an architect and as a building official. He is looking at it, does this building represent a threat? Is this a safety hazard? And so we were standing outside, and we were on the opposite side of the building. We'd already gone through the interior. We were now outside, and we were talking as a group, and I turned and he was gone. And it was a few minutes later before he reemerged, and he walked around the building from this west corner, the southwest corner here, and he came back, and he didn't have anything to say. I had ridden from City Hall with him. We get back in the truck. We start back. He gets out there on Main Street and gets down to the light there at 3 Crosses. And he turned in and looked at me and he said, "Troy, you know something? That is a well-built building. There's not a single crack in the plaster on the exterior. And did you see the support beams when we were in the lower floor, the lower level, and where there was a break in the ceiling, in the drop-down ceiling, and you could see the original beams. And the wood on them was that wide, and it was about 12-foot span. There is an argument that this building is made of adobe, that this building is crumbling, that this building will fall in on itself very soon. I will argue, no, I am not an engineer, never have been, but my 4 good eyes can clearly see that building is structurally very sound. That building's not going to fall in. There's no way. Maybe in 2,000 years, it might give in. But even then, I'm going to argue it probably will not. This is what the front facade looked like 8 years ago. Yes, there have been some alterations. These doors this is just infill to reduce the entryway in its aesthetic. And two years ago, here's what we're looking at. Unkempt grounds, vandalism. There at the rear, some of that debris came from the bathhouse that was behind it. And you'll note, you see one row of windows, right? But on the drawing, there were 2 rows. The argument long time has been, well, that's they only projected 2 rows on the drawing. But until you go into the building and go to what is the lower level, and you can see where the windows are boarded up inside and outside. Okay, well, why can't you see them from outside? All of this earth, when you're standing on site, there is just a very, very slight slope from the back of the building downward toward the north. It was over from the vantage point of this photograph of the back. It would be back over here behind the building to the right is where the swimming pool was located. Some of you probably remember it well. When they excavated the site to install the swimming pool, the soil was not taken off the site. It was pushed up against the building. They buried the back of the building, sealed up the windows, and put a lot of pressure on the building. All this earth is causing a problem. And it's done that for 60 years and not one crack in the exterior plaster. That's a well-built building. There's the west side, the southwest corner again. You can see all the additions. These are all gone. And so what were we left with? Well, after the demolition was done, this portion right here also went away. This is a non-original component. This is cinder block construction. Original opening, original. These 2 windows have been sealed up. That window has been sealed up. All the headers are there, all the wood timbers and such. And does anybody recognize any of this material that was out behind the building? That is St. Genevieve's. That's the metal sculpture that was along Main Street, there where the plaza, on the side of the plaza. It was disassembled. It was taken from Main Street to the north side of the country club building, and it was plopped there on the ground, and it was there for years. And it is now located in a yard owned by the city, or a protected yard, so that when there's a use for it, it will be reinstalled, okay? But it was just laying there on the ground in pieces. We were informed by the previous property owner that we were on a very tight time frame. If we didn't remove it, they would, and they already had it scheduled to be sold for scrap metal to Vinton, Texas, to the yard down there. We took care of it. So what we did, the supervision for the demolition, they basically had to separate at the point of contact with the original east wall, had to make an incision in order to separate, as I suppose demolition goes, as gracefully as possible, and then rip down the addition. And that's what happened. So we were perfectly fine with removing the non-historic component that were actually adversely impacting the architectural integrity of the original. And so this is what the building currently looks like, minus this non-original portion of the wall. You can see the AstroTurf, that plane in the front. The original steps are there. The original porch is still there. That concrete slab is balanced up there because it provided for an easier entrance, I suppose. It made for a place where you could have more people on the front steps. And so there's another view of the back of the building with one row of windows during the cleanup. And this is the fate of the building at this moment. However, the question remains, what is to be done? Now, there are stories that have happened. Let me back up. There are questions that have arisen in the past week. Exactly 7 days ago, Souter Miller Engineers and Architects here in Cruces applied for a demolition permit with the city of Las Cruces to remove the building itself, to go ahead and finish demolition. On that application came in, it was applied for on the morning of September 8th. By that afternoon, we had already denied the application for the very reason Chapter 40 is an ordinance. The Section 15 in that chapter outlines the very steps that have to be taken in order to apply for a demolition permit. There were about 18 steps and they skipped all of them. Okay, so we will operate by the ordinance, by law. And so we had to inform them, no, we're denying your application. You need to begin at the beginning, and that is a pre-application meeting. The effort to demonstrate that demolition is your only recourse requires an extensive amount of information, data collection, and it is a lengthy application process, perhaps even by government standards. And in this instance, it's deliberate. And the purpose is we do not want to incentivize demolition. We want to incentivize restoration, adaptive reuse, productive economic use. So where we are right now, we're literally at the beginning of what possibly is going to be a very lengthy process. After an application is completed and submitted for my review, I will schedule a hearing with the Historic Preservation Commission. Upon that outcome of that hearing, the demolition delay, this is in the ordinance, of 180 days begins. Okay, so a 6-month demolition delay. We have a window of time. There is a lesson to be learned from 2008. In 1908, Henry Trost designed a bungalow made of adobe for John O. Miller. And it was built across on the north side of the New Mexico Agricultural and Mechanical Arts College. In 2008, on Thanksgiving Day, that building was knocked down, as everyone I believe is aware, is familiar. Where Chick-fil-A stands today, the Miller House stood for a century. Eric Liefeld of Mesilla Valley Preservation, that's the event that is when he and I first met and have been friends and colleagues ever since. The lesson to learn from that episode to apply here is that in 2008, it was an adversarial approach with the property owner. And the owner, in his assessment, when asked, why did you do it? He said, I had to show those people who's boss, or something to that effect. I'll do it my way. And we the people, lost an irreplaceable landmark. All right, so we don't want to take that approach with the country club building. It is my firm belief that the country club building itself is an economic asset. Quite right, it's in bad shape. The property owners, I understand completely their point of view about maximizing their finances, maximizing their profit potential, This is not about ill will or personalities. This is about hopefully meeting for somewhere in the middle for a shared vision, because it's the big objective that you want to achieve about taking on a project of this nature. I understand they probably do not want to tie up money in its restoration, but others are willing to do that work. So we have to work together in order to accomplish something. And unfortunately, adversarial approaches tend to be counterproductive. So my point of view, in my position, I actually feel quite confident that this building is going to be restored and put back into productive use. I don't know what that will actually look like in the end, but I feel very confident that it will. Several days ago, Jim sent an email to the members of the County Historical Society. And he had listed 3 different items on there, including this presentation and including upcoming events. And then he listed the names of our administrators with the city and offered a request, put out a request. If you have something to say in support or defense of this building, there is a power in the human voice. There is a power that we need to exercise. Mayor, city manager, and city council members, let them know what your point of view is. It really does help. The list of supporters that I showed a little bit ago, folks are speaking up. And what we want to see is this building return to productive use, but a viable use, not just restore it for restoration's sake. I've gone a little bit long, but I will be glad to entertain questions or comments or discussion points. And before I conclude, I would like to thank the County Historical Society, as well as New Mexico State University Special Collections Library for the loan of photographs. That's all I have at the moment. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and I'll entertain questions. Thank you so much.
So if there's any questions out of the audience here, and we'll also look on the Zoom and see if there's a question there. Anybody in here? Okay, I think them. Okay.
See, I thought I covered the subject so brilliantly that no one would dare ask a question. Yes, sir.
Well, my question is an aesthetic question.
Okay.
So one thing about the Trost clubhouse in Las Cruces that is, I think, very unique and maybe a really great argument point is that its architectural style is very unique for the Trost design style. The fact that its photos have a flammable. So I was wondering maybe if you could talk about that. Maybe how that is not the architectural style that we see in Las Cruces very much, but it's something that is very Southwest, very borderlands. So
quite right.
So I also would want to know, do you know why Trost decided to design a style that's not very prevalent in Las Cruces?
To begin with the second question, one of the best descriptions that I have ever been privy to while seated in an audience in a lecture hall there at UTEP, it was Dr. Max Grossman who was talking about Henry Trost in El Paso. And he showed a handful of different buildings. None of them were designed in the same manner or style, not one of them. And they're all masterpieces, each one of them. And the way he described it was, if you look at all of these different examples of work, Henry Trost was doing the very same thing that the Beatles did in the recording of the White Album during that entire session. The Beatles were recording a song of so many different styles of music, and they demonstrated that they can do it just as well as anybody, and showed a versatility and a range of creativity unmatched in many ways musically. And Henry Trost could design a building in any architectural style and master it and make it his own. Why did he choose a Pueblo revival influenced building for an area that historically does not reflect the Pueblo building type? That is a very good question. Perhaps the answer is he simply wanted to. Hadn't tried it before. It was unique and distinctive for here. Would this building perhaps fit better somewhere Socorro, New Mexico North? Perhaps, but it's distinctive and unique. Okay, so maybe that's the answer. It's whimsical. He just wanted to. So to my knowledge, Trost and Trost architects designed on the sheet that we were looking at earlier, in the bottom corner, there was a notation, commission number, and it was somewhere north of 2,300. This firm designed perhaps 6,000 buildings, and somewhere north, maybe only about half of them that ever were realized or were drawn on paper were actually constructed. There are only three kinds of buildings. There are those that are built, there are those that haven't been built yet, and those that are unbuildable. Okay? A lot of buildings only exist in the imagination or on sheets of paper. And about half of the entire catalog of Trost and Trost projects were never built. But about 3,000 buildings were overall. And this was number 2,300 some odd. Important thing here, out of all those buildings up to 1929, this is, to my knowledge, only the second and final country club building Trost and Trost architects designed. The other one was designed in the eastern part of El Paso, Texas, and it was built in 1916, and 4 or 5 years later, it was consumed by fire. It was a beautiful building. It was remarkable. Very different in style from the building that we're looking at here. This may be the one and only remaining country club building designed by that architectural firm. A lot of commercial buildings, a lot of residences, a lot of schools. This is it. All right. So we have a unique, truly, we have a unique building type. No other place can say it, that they have a Trost and Trost design country club or former country club. That means something. I hope it means a lot. Does that satisfy your question, my good friend? Thank you, sir. Is there anything else that I can address? Oh, okay.
Might be a question on Zoom. No, just thank yous.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, no other questions? Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
One more right there.
I have one question. Can building be purchased from these owners?
You know, Bobby, I do not know the answer to that question. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. I just do not know. But I would imagine, just to back up just a skosh, just for your edification. I think they say skosh in Alabama. I think that's a proper term. It's a proper measurement, skosh. On the second day of this month, Dr. Tim Pitts, my colleague in community development, he and I reviewed a response that I had written to the property owners of a counter proposal. They had asked, for certain things from the city that they would be looking for in order to retain this building. So we found their offer to be unachievable, that it was just something we could not accept. The city could not meet those terms, let alone, individuals. So we replied with a counter proposal. And one of the one of the first things mentioned was save yourself the money that it would cost to demolish the building. It's Will Rogers' observation years ago that the fastest way to double your money is to fold a dollar bill in half and put it right back into your pocket. And that's exactly the thinking I had in mind. They think, according to what they had written, that this building could be taken down for $20,000. I do not think so. This is not some 10 by 10 adobe that's been unused for decades. This is a well-built, thick, engineered building. This may be a six-figure demolition job. This could be $100,000. That's substantial. Save the money. Keep that money. Also, donate the building and a little bit of dirt around it, okay? Donate that to a nonprofit. The IRS will thank you for it, and they will thank you very, very handsomely. That's a nice tax deduction. It also buys a whole lot of local goodwill that's priceless. And, you know, please permit us to explore avenues for funding, for grants, in order to find money to restore this building. And then we will have this building as part of your overall site development, not separate from. So we felt that we made a very, you know, forthright and generous proposal. Regrettably, we did not receive a response. And then on September 8th was the request for demolition. I have subsequently learned that the property owners have spoken with our city manager, and they want to know what's going on. And to his credit, he did say, well, we have a process, we have a local law, and I encourage you to follow it step by step. We do not have a whole lot of time, but we do have time. We do have some. It's baked into the ordinance. City staff is on top of this, but we do need we need help on two fronts: convincing the decision makers of our city that this building is worth saving, and also, equally important, convincing the property owners that this building is worth saving and that they do have an asset, not a liability. And that because they have an asset, it is imperative that they capitalize on it. And I'm very intentional with my use of the word capitalize, because that's exactly what they stand to gain. I wish I owned it, but what am I? I'm just an overeducated preservationist. You know, there you have it. Hopefully, the answer to that question may be forthcoming. We'll see. I think all cards are on the table. I don't think there's any offer that's not unacceptable right now. So we will see. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Y'all have a good evening.
Is that yours?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. So that concludes our presentation. Don't forget, our next meeting is October 20th. Hope to see you here. Bye, everybody. Good night.